Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to the midweek. It is Wednesday, October the 2nd. This is Let's Talk Tropics, a bit of a discussion on what's happening out in the tropical world, what might be threatening us, and other new things that are developing out there. And we're still watching our areas down to the south for the possibility of some development here over the next couple of days. And Kirk continues to strengthen out in the open Atlantic, and we have a new tropical depression as well. So we'll get into all that in just a little while, but another pretty day here in Acadiana, 86 degrees. It is a little less humid though this afternoon, thanks to some fresh northerly breezes that have come in behind a front. That front really not real noticeable except for a stronger north breeze and some slightly lower dew points. That front is eventually going to kind of wash out, and humidity levels are going to start to increase again as we go into the second half of the week. But it still feels like 88 with the heat index, and the pressure is holding steady at 30 inches even. And as we look at the skies out there, generally blue skies. Off to the east and southeast though, there are a few puffy clouds that are starting to develop as well. It looks like a few clouds there on the old Henderson cam. That's actually looking off toward the west, and the Ambassador Caffrey camera has a few clouds lifting there off to the north. So we are looking at a lot of sunshine today, and I think skies are going to stay sunny throughout the rest of the week. So this time around, we're going to go ahead and start with the tropical weather outlook, and that orange blob, yes, is still there over much of the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico and the extreme northwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. Now remember, this is not a forecast track. This is just a bubble that's showing that we could see some tropical development in this area. It is not telling you which way it would go, how strong it would go. It's just initial development is possible in that area, and because it's shaded in orange, it's a 40% risk, and 40 to 60% is considered a medium risk for any tropical development. And then farther out to the east, you'll see the circle. That's newly formed tropical depression number 13, and of course Kirk is out in the middle part of the Atlantic. It is still a hurricane and is forecast to become a major hurricane here in the next couple of days. The new global tropics hazard outlook has come out. It came out yesterday, but unfortunately it comes out after we do Let's Talk Tropics. So you're looking at, first of all, this one is from now until the early part of next week. So now through about Tuesday of next week, and then this here will start again on Tuesday and then going out another week from there for week 2. So on the top graphic you can see that there's still the possibility of some activity, southern Gulf, western part of the Caribbean. Of course, that might still be talking about that disturbed area that we're watching to our south. And it also indicates the possibility of still perhaps some new development out here in the middle part of the Atlantic. Now remember, this does not take into consideration any activity that's already out there. This is determining where we think we might see tropical development. But check out week 3 going into the second half of the month. Still some activity possible there over the Caribbean, which again, this time of the year, that is one of the more likely places that you would see tropical development during the month of October. But also notice that the extended forecast is really not showing anything out here in the Atlantic. So could that be a sign that things are starting to slow down there over the central and eastern part of the Atlantic? And then we tend to focus a little bit more on the Gulf and the Caribbean and the western Atlantic, very similar to what we see during the early part of the hurricane season. Of course, we'll just have to wait and see what goes on, but this new global tropics hazard outlook, at least for week 2, has been pretty useful at showing development zones going into that 10 to 14 day period. Of course, week 3 is still really out in la la land, so it really just kind of gives us a little bit of a trend. So as we look at the U.S. satellite, a lot of sunshine basically from coast to coast, with the exception of the eastern seaboard where we've got some clouds there. And then we've also got a bit of an upper trough that extends down here over parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's bringing some thunderstorms and a concentration of rain there over the Bay of Campeche. But that is not the tropical area that we're watching. It's more of an upper level piece of energy that's kind of working westward from here, and that's going to go ahead and roll on toward the west. And then of course down in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, we've got those thunderstorms that are generating some higher seas out there, but our local waters are pretty nice. That front is getting the winds up and the seas up just a little bit, so it might be a little rougher than yesterday And tomorrow, I think we're going to see some improving conditions out for our friends in the offshore waters. But you are also probably noticing this kind of a little of a blob here south of Cuba. That's part of that upper trough, which really is about like right in here. So you got development of some rains there, and then you got development of some rains on the western side of that as well. And upper level features don't really help to induce tropical activity a whole lot, but we'll have to wait and see if we get something to develop more on the southern end where the tropical wave is here over the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. Yesterday, most of the action was here. Thunderstorms are now starting to lift a little bit farther to the north in response to that trough that kind of rotates like that. And then the winds are kind of shifting off toward the north. So you're seeing how the winds are blowing the tops off some of those thunderstorms. But I will say that wind shear is expected to reduce a little bit in that particular area. So straddling the western Caribbean, the eastern Pacific, and the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, that Central American gyre might start to get back into action and try to pull a few things together. So as we look at some of the forecast models, the GFS is indicating a bit of a low pressure area trying to get started here toward the latter part of the weekend and in the early part of next week, and then with some major shear that's going to be along the northern Gulf Coast going into next week. It just kind of keeps any activity that might want to try to develop here much farther toward the south and really not even advancing off toward the northern Gulf Coast. Going to be a ton of shear in this area going into next week. So there's possibility we could see some development, but at least according to the GFS model, it doesn't seem very excited that it's going to be moving in our direction. The Euro model is very, very similar to what we're seeing with the GFS going out 10 days. You get a bit of a low pressure area kind of developing here out in the Bay of Campeche. And it's not real certain on where a specific low is going to be. There are a couple of different development zones out there as well. And then going toward the latter part of that 10-day period, it looks like a trough moving across the northern part of the country might eventually kick this back out to sea and push it out into the Atlantic Ocean. And out here you see Kirk. And then for a second, you'll start to see Leslie kind of peeking in, or what may be Leslie rather, tropical depression number 13, but it is likely to become Leslie farther down the road. Canadian model actually spins something up a little bit faster here over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, maybe late Sunday going into Monday, and then it gets shoved a little bit farther toward the east and then kind of fizzles out. Again, there's a lot of wind shear that's going to be up here along the northern Gulf Coast, according to the GFS, the Euro, and even the Canadian model as well. And you got another front that's going to be in this particular area going out to about next Wednesday or Thursday, so that would help to kick things out of the way. But I did want to point out here off toward the east that this particular model is bringing what is 13, or what will eventually become Tropical Storm or Hurricane Leslie. It is pushing it a little bit farther toward the west. Right now it doesn't seem like it's going to be a threat to the coastal United States, but this model brings Leslie much, much farther to the west compared to what we're seeing with Hurricane Kirk. Meanwhile, the Icon model is showing development a little bit faster there over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and then just having that low, very weak low, kind of meander its way across the central part of the Gulf of Mexico. There's just way too much action that's going to be happening up here to allow it to move off toward the north. So the Icon model is much faster on developing something maybe toward the latter part of this week, going into Friday or Saturday, while the GFS and the Euro and the Canadian kind of wait until the latter part of the weekend and the early part of next week to get something to develop. But just like the Canadian model and really the Euro as well, eventually everything kind of pushes in this direction off toward the east, maybe over toward Florida, but none of the models are very impressed by giving this a status that's anything super strong. So that's good news for all of us that are watching this here along the northern Gulf Coast. These models are really showing something very, very weak and really having a hard time making its way closer to the northern Gulf Coast. And during the month of October, a lot of stuff that develops down here near the Yucatan, whether it's in the western Caribbean or if it's in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, Because of the way the patterns are shifting as we transition from summer to fall, a lot of the systems that would develop down there are going to shove their way off toward the east. It doesn't mean all of them will, because we've seen hurricanes hit Louisiana during the month of October, but as a general rule, I would say the majority of them do get pushed off toward the east. So we'll have to wait and see, but right now the good news is we don't have a whole lot to worry about for what is possibly developing down to the south. But also make sure you just kind of check in every once in a while to see what's going on in case we get some changes in the models, because we have seen that happen before. A couple of things that's going for that wave that's down to the south are the water temperatures. We've talked about this an awful lot, that the water temperatures are up in that 86 to 88 degree range. And the wind shear over the western part of the Caribbean Sea seems to be kind of lightening up just a little bit, and it may lighten up a little bit more over the next couple of days, especially here over the Yucatan and down here over the southern part of the Bay of Campeche. But looking at some of the extended models, there's going to be massive wind shear here that's probably going to extend into the Gulf of Mexico as well as we start the new week next week. So that first would probably shear anything apart, or at least keep anything in the Gulf of Mexico very weak, but it would also, with some of these troughs that are moving here, hopefully it would shove everything a little bit farther toward the south. So the wind shear is not a good friend of tropical development. It might help it to develop in the near future, but in the extended forecast, it's not going to allow this thing to get very strong. Again, based on what models we're looking at here right now. So let's kind of focus in on a couple of the other things out there. Of course, Hurricane Kirk pretty clearly stands out here in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. It is a very large storm, and it has been intensifying. It's in a really good position with warm waters and low wind shear, and it's already really getting its act together. And on the close-up view there, you can see that it's just a very well-shaped hurricane, and as it moves off toward the northwest, we think it's going to strengthen a little bit more, and perhaps by tomorrow at the earliest, it could become a major hurricane. Remember, a major hurricane is Category 3 or higher. Our winds right now are at 85 miles per hour, so it's a Category 1, but it is forecast to strengthen over the next couple of days. And then we've also got newly formed Tropical Depression number 13, which is farther out here, so I am really hoping that a lot of my graphics are all spelled right and stuff, because this one was just upgraded shortly before the show started, so it's kind of a little panic to get those graphics together there for Tropical Depression number 13. But it is also forecast to get a name, and that would be Leslie, and it's also forecast to become a hurricane as it moves off toward the west for a while and then takes a little bit more of a turn toward the northwest. Again, both Kirk and what may become Leslie at this point in time is no threat to the Acadiana region, nor really the U.S. coast or even the Caribbean Sea. So, but it is expected to increase in intensity, and a couple of the models are getting it up to a Category 3 or higher, with the bulk of the models kind of keeping it into the low-end Category 1, Category 2 strength. Most of them are here in Category 1. But you can see in the extended forecast, especially if this thing were to drift a little farther toward the west, like what the Canadian model was showing, then it might have a better chance to increase its intensity and get up to Category 3 or Category 4. Do remember, though, hurricane season does not end until November the 30th. So we're basically right here at the beginning of October, which is typical activity that we would see in the mid part of August. I know this August was really lame when it came to any tropical development. We just didn't have a whole lot. We only had 2 named storms develop, but then in September we got 6. So that kind of covered the 4 we normally get in August and the 4 we normally get in September. So usually August and September, we end up with 8, and we ended up with 8, but 6 of them, of course, happened during the month of September. But you still have some pretty decent activity here going into the early part of October, and usually at about October the 20th is where you can kind of start to let your guard down a little bit. But we have had tropical storms and hurricanes come close and hit the Louisiana coast all the way through Halloween. November, of course, things really start to drop off, and it's more like what we would see during the months of June and July. So that's what I've got for you today. We'll continue to watch that area down to the south. If you like this video, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications too. And in between shows, I'll have updates on my social media pages there, both on Facebook and X. If you want to follow those, you'll get all the latest information if anything new develops or if we get any changes with the forecast of anything down to our south. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you on Acadiana Weather Today tomorrow morning at 7:30 right here on YouTube.